You have no right to be here. Get off this property now.
I am authorized personnel.
This badge means you are interfering with an investigation.
I never thought my quiet life, my simple need for peace would land me dead center in a battle with a homeowners association. Not after everything. For 35 years I was in the trenches, mostly on the regulatory side of things. State-level policy, agricultural enforcement, land use law. When I retired, all I wanted was quiet. A little piece of earth where nobody knew my name, where I could just let the fruit do the talking. That was the dream. I found it in a place I call Oakhaven Ridge. 52 weary apple trees on a plot of land that was just a mess. Rusted junk, overgrown brush, a farmhouse that had seen better decades. But the soil was good, and I saw the potential, the bone structure. I spent a year, maybe more, clearing, planting, pruning. A kind of therapy, really. I was an old widower, a grandfather, just Elijah Thorne with a beat-up sun hat. Nobody asked about my past, and that suited me fine. My land sat right on the eastern border of the Stonebrook Estates subdivision, technically outside their HOA lines, but close enough to be visible from their manicured walking trails. I knew the area. I knew the zoning. I'd helped draft the regional agricultural exemption codes myself back in the late 90s. I was grandfathered in, and then some. My little fruit stand wasn't for profit. Just a table, a jar, a sign that read, "Need a bite? Pay what you can or don't, we all get hungry." It worked. Kids from the local school would come by on field trips, drawing the bees and the blossoms. It felt like community, the kind I'd missed. But then Rhiannon Wells showed up. Not Karen, but Rhiannon. And somehow that felt worse, a sophisticated kind of venom. She moved into Stonebrook in early spring, and suddenly she was everywhere, always walking her tiny manicured white dog past the orchard. Always staring, always frowning at my weathered tractor. The smell of my compost. At first, I ignored the letters from the HOA, those passive-aggressive notes about visual inconsistency. Then came the escalation. We have noted continued unauthorized commercial activity on adjacent parcels. That one made me pause. I knew their bylaws were toothless against me, but I also knew the playbook. This was about power, about control. One afternoon, she didn't send a letter. She came right up to the edge of my gravel drive. She didn't walk through the open gate. She stood rigid. Arms crossed over a blazer that cost more than my first pickup truck. "You need to remove that stand, Mr. Thorne," she said. Her voice sharp and precise like cut glass. "It's an absolute eyesore. You're lowering the aesthetic standard of the neighborhood." I was sorting Golden Delicious into wooden crates, sweat on my brow. I straightened up slowly, tipped my hat. "Good morning to you too, ma'am. This land has been zoned and worked agricultural since the 60s. I'm not running a chain store. I'm sharing apples." "This is a residential estate," she snapped back, leaning into the fence. "If you want to play farmer, go do it in the actual country. We have bylaws and we intend to enforce them." I didn't react. That's what people like Rhiannon want, a fear reaction, an apology. I just smiled, not politely, but the kind of slow, quiet smile that says, "I know something you don't." I went back to my apples. She stood there until the silence became too heavy for her expensive outfit. Then she turned and marched away, her sharp heels clicking a furious rhythm on the pavement. I knew the storm was building. People like her don't stop once they've targeted something they can't control. The harassment became a flood, intimidating, legal-sounding documents filled with misused jargon. She tried to bluff me with language, Article 7, Section B, all meaningless to a man who literally wrote the book on Article 7. I sent back a one-paragraph reply, direct and bureaucratic, citing the exact state statutes and parcel numbers, ending with a simple warning. Any further interference with activities conducted within my legal property boundaries will be considered harassment. Then came the cameras. Tiny motion sensor lenses zip-tied to the HOA fence, pointing right into my rows of trees. When I called the HOA, they claimed wildlife tracking. It was insulting, but I documented everything. Every flyer, every time she hurried a neighbor past without waving, every little camera. I felt the warmth of the community start to cool, replaced by suspicion. She wasn't just trying to silence my orchard. She was trying to manufacture a narrative that I was a threat. A rogue element spoiling her curated suburban fantasy. It all culminated one brisk Thursday in early October. The fall harvest was in full swing. A big yellow school bus from the elementary school was rolling up the drive for a scheduled tour. Lights flashing, kids buzzing, and right behind it, 2 county police cruisers. blue and red lights swirling through the orchard, painting the golden delicious leaves in a nervous, stuttering light. Rhiannon was standing near the fence, phone still in her hand, wearing that smug, sickening smirk of victory. I walked toward the senior officer, calm as I could be. The kids were still pressed against the bus windows. "Sir, we've had a report of unauthorized commercial activity involving minors. Mind if we talk?" I looked at the bus, then at the apples, and then at the woman by the fence, savoring her moment. "Sure, officer," I said, my voice steady. "But before we begin, you might want to run my name." He raised an eyebrow. "Your name, sir?" "Joseph Thorne," I replied evenly. The partner on the tablet tapped a few keys. His eyes widened, just a fraction, a sharp intake of breath. The senior officer turned back to me, his posture subtly changing, his voice dropping an octave. "Mr. Thorne, is it true you were the director for state agricultural enforcement?" I nodded once. "Retired. Served for 22 years. There was a long, heavy beat of silence. "I think we need to take this offline," he muttered. We walked to the side of the barn, out of Rhiannon's earshot, but not out of her sight. He rubbed the back of his neck. "Sir, I have to be honest. The call said you were running an unlicensed event with potential exposure to contaminated soil. Your name, though, it's known. I took a few classes under your division back in the academy. Soil safety protocols." I let out a slow, tired breath. "Then you know, officer, that there's nothing illegal happening here. These apples are lab-tested. The farm is grandfathered in, under the county agricultural exemption and the Rural Education Use Act. I wrote the damn thing. No sales, no chemicals, just kids learning where their food comes from." He nodded. "I believe you, sir. But procedure?" I had the binder ready, the one with every map, every statute, every piece of paperwork. He and his partner flipped through it, not skeptical but with growing embarrassment. When he snapped it shut, he looked at me, then over at Rhiannon. "Everything looks good. You're in the clear. Sorry for the inconvenience," but Rhiannon wasn't done. She marched up, righteous and loud, blocking the officer's path back to his cruiser. "Are you just gonna let him do this? There are children here. He doesn't have a vendor's permit. This is a business, not a home." The officer held up a hand. "Ma'am, calm down. With respect, this property is not under HOA jurisdiction. You have no authority here." Rhiannon's mouth opened, then closed. She looked at me for the first time, really looked, as if seeing not a tired old man, but a ghost from the halls of power she had tried to usurp. The officer turned to her, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "Mr. Thorne isn't just some guy with apples, ma'am. He wrote half the A code for this county. You're barking up the wrong tree." Rhiannon's face turned crimson. She pulled her tiny dog's leash so tight the little thing yipped. She didn't say another word, just stood there frozen, utterly irrelevant as the school bus doors opened and the sound of children's laughter flooded my quiet orchard. The police left. The kids picked apples. The orchard was alive. And that, I realized, was the real crime in her mind. I knew she wouldn't retreat. People like Rhiannon don't. They regroup. Sure enough, 2 weeks later, 2 new officers showed up. Young, clipboard in hand, clearly sent to intimidate. They cited an executive order and demanded to inspect my kitchen and storage shed for food safety compliance. "By whose authority?" I asked. The younger one, looking flustered, glanced down. Ms. Wells filed the report. "We were told to document and record." I saw her silhouette through the trees again, phone raised, recording me. I sighed, folding my arms. "Officers, I appreciate your diligence, but you need a warrant to see inside my structures. And any inspection must be accompanied by a certified agent from the health division, with proper cause. I've already spoken to their legal liaison. You were sent, not informed." They hesitated, recognizing the language of authority, the certainty of a man who knew the system better than they did. I looked past them right at Rhiannon. "Rhiannon," I said firmly, walking right up to the line. "You're trespassing again. You take one more step onto this property, and I will file a restraining order with the sheriff's department." She laughed, a brittle, desperate sound. "You think anyone cares about your apples? They'll see who you really are, Elijah." I raised an eyebrow. "You mean when they remember I helped draft the Soil Protection Act that saved half this valley a decade ago, or the rural produce exemption that allowed low-income farmers to sell without drowning in red tape? Is that who I really am?" Her bravado vanished. For the first time, I saw genuine fear. She hadn't just poked the bear. She'd poked the man who helped build the very forest she was trying to chop down. The officers backed off, handing me an unsigned citation. "Just protocol," the tall one mumbled, and drove away. When the HOA tried to escalate the fight by spreading a ridiculous flyer calling me an embedded operative trying to exploit loopholes, I knew it was time. I pulled out my old lockbox, commendations, legislative drafts, my life's work. The next day I did something I had never done. I attended the HOA meeting. Rhiannon was mid-sentence at the podium, railing against unregulated spaces. She froze when she saw me. I walked to the front, slow and steady, carrying my binder. "I appreciate the opportunity to clarify," I said, taking the microphone. For the next 5 minutes I didn't boast, I educated. I laid out my credentials, passed copies of the official land maps and exemption codes to the board. "If you attempt to pass this new bylaw," I said plainly, looking right at the young HOA president Kyle, "you will be in violation of state statutes. Not because I'm special, but because the law is clear." I pointed at the documentation. "Before I was a farmer, I was one of the people who wrote the book you're now trying to rewrite." The motion was immediately tabled. The room was silent, but the war wasn't over. Rhiannon, through the HOA, filed a request to reassess my land's zoning. If they couldn't defeat me with bylaws, they'd try to unravel the framework itself. My response was immediate. I sent the full documentation to the county clerk and the local newspaper editor. Then, I filed a Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, request against the HOA itself, a little-known quirk in the law. 2 weeks later, I had 28 pages of internal emails, including Rhiannon's note to Kyle. "He's bluffing. We can say his soil has runoff. People will believe anything with the word contamination." Quiet fury. This was fabrication. I made 2 calls. One to the State Department for an official complaint, and one to a journalist I trusted. A week later, the article dropped, Fruit of the Fight, how one orchard owner stood up to HOA tyranny. It went viral. The final scene took place at the County Planning Board public hearing. I arrived early. The room was packed. Farmers, teachers, veterans. Rhiannon was there, arms folded, trying to project bitterness, not defeat. When I spoke, I didn't use notes. "I've been accused, surveilled, harassed, and slandered by an entity that has no legal jurisdiction over my land." This was never about apples. It was about control, about power, and about what happens when people are too afraid to stand up to it. I passed Rhiannon's FOIA emails to the panel. The applause came immediately, and it wasn't polite. Rhiannon walked to the microphone one last time. "Mr. Thorne has positioned himself as a victim, but rules exist for a reason. Neighborhood cohesion depends on predictability," but the chairwoman cut her off. "Miss Wells, we have reviewed your documentation. It provides no legal standing for your claims. Furthermore, your correspondence contains language we find concerning. You are advised to cease any further unapproved surveillance." Rhiannon's face was chalk white. She just stood there. The fallout was swift. Kyle, the HOA president, called an emergency vote. Rhiannon was removed 6-1. Her resignation was an email, flat, forgettable silence. The investigation widened. It turned out she had filed anonymous complaints against at least 5 other residents: a mom with a daycare, an elderly couple with chickens, a disabled vet using a shed for therapy. She was using community integrity to mask what the papers later called suburban vigilantism. She was officially banned from holding any HOA office in the county. I finally had peace. Not silence, but peace. I converted the orchard into a community trust parcel, using my own law, the Urban Agricultural Enrichment Act, to guarantee public access forever. We hosted a winter lantern walk that December. I watched families, veterans, and kids laughing, standing on the same land that Rhiannon had tried to turn into a battleground. I often sit on my porch now. The old dog Scout is curled up at my feet. I watch the new trees we planted, half apple, half plum, take root. I realized the story wasn't about me winning. It was about standing still long enough and letting the truth bloom around me. So if anyone ever asks me how I beat the HOA, I'll tell them I didn't. I just stood rooted and let the chaos tire itself out. The justice I got didn't need to shout. It was just the quiet, certain kind that grows deep in the land. Call to action. If you've ever dealt with a situation where rules replaced compassion, or if you've seen the kind of suburban vigilantism I'm talking about, I want to hear your story. How did you stand your ground? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let's talk about the difference between community and control. And if you enjoyed this story, Hit that like button and share it with someone who needs a little quiet victory today.